I'll just waiting for it. We'll start.
We are ready to go.
We're ready to go?
Yeah.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate all of you taking your time and being a part of this. I think we have a lot of great, cool things to talk about. So I guess let's get started. I guess the first thing is let's just go around and introduce ourselves, and you can say hi and keep it pretty simple, right? You just start in the back corner over there.
My name is Moda McChesney, student at Benson Polytechnic High School and student reporter for AM 1450 KBPS Portland.
Just go. Yeah.
My name's Sylvia Hart Lansford, and I'm with the War Resisters League, and we're very interested in the topic about ROTC.
I'm with Sylvia here with the same concerns, Herschel Souls.
Thank you.
I'm Michelle Muir. I'm the Special Education Director.
Jay Beal, Chief of Student Support Services.
Dr. Cheryl Proctor, Deputy Superintendent, Instruction.
I'm Patty Sullivan, board member.
Yeah. Eddie Wong, board member, chair.
Renard Adams, Chief of Research Assessment and Accountability.
Joanna Tobin, and I'm the Senior Director for Middle Grades Core Academics and Redesign.
Billy Christie, Senior Director for School Core Academics.
Kimberly Armstrong, Chief Academic Officer.
Kara Bradshaw, executive assistant.
So unless anybody has anything to want to start with, but I figure we just go with the agenda and let's get started. Yeah.
I'll be sharing my screen.
Yeah. So we're going with the
Staff updates.
yes.
So I want to say before we start with the staff updates, that the content of the staff updates this afternoon is in follow-up to our last meeting. And we are going to just share some information that came from board direction and requests that came out of it.
So my understanding is that the last meeting, there was a request to understand what it might cost to move all of our middle schools to a 7-period day, knowing that all of them aren't on a 7-period day. Presently, we have some that aren't. And so my team usually does that kind of costing and estimating. So I'm happy to share with you what that means. So with a 7-period day, we have two things we can do. Option one is we can use our current staffing formula. And if we do that, it'll cost us just under 7 FTE. We only have 5 middle schools that are not on a 7-period day. Those are listed before you: Gray, Osford, Jackson, Selwood, West Sylvan. If we use the current middle school staffing formula, teacher-student loads would increase by about 20, which would incur additional costs that aren't shown in the 877,000 based on teacher overages. As you know, in our current agreement with the Portland, as you may know, in our current agreement with the Portland Association of Teachers, whenever student class size or the number of students at the high school level, middle school level exceeds a certain point, teachers receive additional compensation for teaching that number of students. So option one raises that on average by about 20 per teacher. Option two, we could do some revision to the middle school staffing formula that will cost more FTE. As you can see, it'll cost a little over 11 FTE for a cost of just under $1.5 million. And this also will raise student loads by half of what option one would do. The other, I have one more slide, and then I'll be ready to take questions if that's okay. The other part around middle school redesign is what about our K-8s, right? Our comprehensive schools that have middle grades as a part of their enrollment as well as elementary grades. Currently, only one of our 14 K-8s is on a 7-period day, and that's Fabian. The rest are not. And that in these data in that count, we are including Access Pioneer and Metropolitan Learning Center. So the cost to bring our K-8s along is 12 FTE for the tune of 1.5 million.
I got a letter from a parent
Mhm.
saying that going to the 7-period day shortens the periods to 35 minutes. And that wasn't enough time. Have you heard that complaint?
I have not heard that, but I can certainly, my team and I can look into that. Because we have insight into school schedules via our student information system. Joanna, do you have any additional context?
Sure. They're about 48 minutes when we go to that model.
When you go to,
And then we still have the advisory programs built into that on top of those 48.
okay, so it's 48, not 30.
Approximately.
Okay.
Go back to the previous slide really quick.
Sure, absolutely.
Thanks. So,
I'm sorry.
oh yeah,
The slide needs to go through the Zoom, so it can
Oh.
be a live stream.
Okay.
I just downloaded it from the materials and I can share it.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen then, right? Okay, sorry about
You
that.
can continue the conversation while I work on getting this up. I just needed to,
Yes.
thank you.
so again, my question with, so it, according to that slide, it increases the teacher load by 20 and the option 2 by 10. Just, sorry, my memory's a little fuzzy right now. So the schools are not at 507, they're at 506 right now, right? And so when,
Joanna, sorry.
Yes.
yeah, when 507 also increase the amount of prep time for the teachers as well?
There's still, so with 5 or
Okay,
6,
so one's going to be advisory.
with 5 of 6, teachers are teaching 5 periods. With 5 of 7, teachers are still teaching 5.
Then the 2 of the 7 that
So who
Not
teaches
teaching.
the other?
one would be advisory.
It's on a master schedule, so there's a rotation by period, but no one teacher would teach.
That's why you need more teachers.
I
Because
see.
you added.
So you're
you added a
fixing it
period.
into the
Yes.
rotation.
Yes.
But they would have longer prep times, right? Because they would have 2 of 7 periods, or is one of them advisory? Is that why?
Well, we have to carefully analyze that because recall that when we go to 7 periods, the periods become a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
Then as Ms. Tobin shared, then if we had a different schedule, and I don't want to speak out of turn, so let us analyze that to see
Yeah.
if that's how much of an increase or a change in planning time that is. We can certainly get that information to you.
Right, awesome.
And middle school planning time is a little more complicated because of differences in start times and whatnot. So anyway, yes, we're happy to help, with that.
Great.
And I don't know if this has to do with the periods, but I also got a letter. People are worried about stuff, obviously, about getting rid of a high-level math class. Is that happening anywhere? See if I can.
We would have to investigate. I don't believe from our academic team, there's been an elimination of a high level course. I wonder if a building leader has made a choice in their scheduling that they're not aware of. I've
Okay,
not heard that.
so I should answer that saying to get in touch with you.
Sure, it could be me.
Okay.
I'll take the ticket.
Or the chief of schools, or, it depends on the level, we could have.
Sounded like middle school.
So can you state what the question was again?
Well, I'm trying to keep going. and I'll see if I can
Okay,
find this.
I think I
know
heard
it's
a
in here
high
somewhere.
level, did you say a content area? Was it math?
It was math.
Okay, so I think we can work through and discuss with you sequencing of math
Okay.
courses through middle and high and single subjects in acceleration and whatnot as well. We can
Okay.
bring that in a future meeting. Bring more clarity.
Okay.
Yeah, and any question I have, feel free to answer at a later time too. You don't have to top of your head. And my other question is, so, I mean, from the last meeting, again, just refreshing memory. Our goal is to go to 5 to 7 for all schools, right? Well, hopefully it seems like the eventual goal. And the reason being is that it adds in, it doesn't take away the options for electives, but at the same time, we can add advisory and also increase options for, time in PE as well, right?
Yes.
Is there like, what was historical reason of why these schools haven't gone to 5 of 7 yet? Is there, or is it just didn't get to it yet?
I think if we consider, budgetary,
Okay.
finance, as we're presenting here today, part of the reason why we have not been able to automatically offer all schools, 5 of 7, is because of budget. Each time, I think there had been a standing practice in 6 period
Yeah.
days. And with the 6 period day, having teachers teaching 5 periods within that. And then when we saw some of the benefits of what could be possible, adding a 7th period and adding more flexibility, we just realized that financially and budgetarily. And then I'll pause so that team could share any other insights that they have. In terms of reasons. 7 periods.
And the main reason for the 7 periods is to get that counseling part in there, correct?
When we have 5 of 6, there's limited options for electives. Students don't have a lot of choice. And that elective tends to be consumed by what is state required, like a PE. So with that limited choice, our students don't always feel good about their schedules all the time, and they would love to add another elective if the school is able to offer it. And oftentimes the best way that schools are able to expand on the offering of electives is by going to a 7 period.
Because you can't cut out one of the requirements. But it's not necessarily because of the counseling.
There is a huge benefit with the 7 period day with advisory, SEL, and all that we can build.
I think it 7 periods allows for students to do to both have robust pursuit of electives and sort of choice courses that they want to pursue, while also receiving necessary supports. So you could see LD instruction, for example, and some learning center special ed supports that are built into a schedule in a way that supports students, as well as opportunities for pursuing choice, and then also opportunities to accelerate. So the flexibility is just greater in the day to both meet student needs and then also student interest.
Okay, this clarifies it for me, because last time we were here, it seemed to me it was mostly focusing on social, emotional time. But it's not necessarily, it's
Yes,
extended for choice. Okay.
in addition to the benefits of the social.
I think one example, if I can remember, also like it increases opportunities for, especially for a lot of kids in special ed, to not miss out as much on their general ed classes, so they can participate more in the general ed classes and still meet the requirements in terms of getting their specific classes, or
And also try to get them to have a fun class too.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
That's great.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any more questions? This is really good. Thank you for putting this together. It helps to kind of see where we're going. And I assume that. I guess my last question before we move on to the next topic was: is there a general kind of plan, or in terms of eventually getting middle schools to the 5 of 7, or is it just we have to wait and see where our budget is going to be, or how that looks?
That's all part of the middle school redesign plan. I know that there's some materials being prepped, I think, at some point for presentation to the board, but in the middle school redesign report, there is a plan that talks about what some of those actions are that we plan to take, not just this year, but for the next few years. I know Joanne can probably talk a little bit more about that, but I also know that there'll be a report that will be coming soon to the board.
To the full board, yeah.
Great.
And we
Forward-
also talked about middle school redesign. That was part of our presentation.
Great. Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah. Thank you. Great. Let's move on to the next thing we have.
It's still the same deck.
Same day.
Yeah, so the next part of the presentation comes from the request from Vice Chair Herman Green. And so we have some very high level information. It is just exploratory to try to answer his question. The question was, could someone look into what the possibility would look like? And so today we just have just brief points of high level. There is no plan currently to move forward on any of it. It's just to again answer our vice chair's questions on JROTC.
So just a few updates. We have reached out to the 8th Brigade, which oversees Oregon as well as several other states, to learn more about the process. They've indicated that there's an application that school districts typically fill out. They have given us a warning to say that there are schools that have been approved to offer JROTC, but haven't been able to find qualified instructors. Much the same way that school districts are having maybe teacher shortages or sub shortages, JROTC schools are also having instructor shortages as well. There, for example, the Madras High School has a JROTC program, but currently doesn't have a qualified instructor. On the following slide, I was informed initially that if we were approved for a JROTC program, that we would receive full funding for the instructor. But in a subsequent conversation, I've learned that that's actually only qualifies for half the funding. So, and all programs, JROTC programs, are required to have 2 instructors. So the school district would have to pay for one, the US Army would pay for the other one. All the equipment, supplies would be covered by the Army. I've reached out to Oregon City High School as well. They have probably the longest established program in the state, and actually had a conversation with Sergeant Aguilar just this past Friday. He was very gracious with his time, offered that he can be a support to us if we were interested. He had a lot of great things to say about the program, and would be, I think, a good a partner if we were interested. And so those are a little, some of the updates. If this was something that we wanted to learn more about, perhaps the next step would be to check in with high school principals to see if any of them are interested.
Yeah.
Director Green's not here today, right?
Vice Chair Green is not here. Yeah. All right, so those were the staff updates.
Somebody wanted to speak on that.
There's an agenda.
Is there time to do that?
Yeah.
When they get to the public comment, is there? This is probably kind of reaching. My question is there any data about increasing like student success and having a JROTC program?
That's a part of the investigation that we would have to do. We have not considered this here at PPS.
Great.
Previously, it has not been a serious consideration here at PPS. So it's going to take a lot of investigating to identify the benefits, cost, benefits, desire among schools, community, and stakeholders. So again, this is very initial, early information. We would have to explore and investigate to get data.
Okay. I have a question about that. Do you have any questions?
No, just totally preliminary, right? Just
So preliminary.
just feeling it out. Okay.
And again, you know, it's preliminary and it's at the request of one of our board chairs.
Thank you. If there's no further comment or question, I guess we can move down the agenda. Beyond 3 reports, or is that, was that?
Staff reports, yes, there. So the first report that we have coming from staff will be on on special education. And so we have Chief Luna and Michelle Mirror. I want to roll my R's a couple more times when I say her name. Who will present to us. Chief Uno is Chief of Student Support Services, and Michelle Vera is over our Senior Director over Special Education.
Yeah, thank you. Kara, do you have the slides? So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about special education. I'm longtime special educator, right? So I could go on for hours related to special education, but I won't.
Yeah, and 4 of us in the room.
Yes.
Special educators. If we could raise our hands, total of 4 at least. So we all could carry the conversation.
And as I know, you both are educators, and so there's components that might not go as deep into, because I know you're familiar with components of it. However, I'm actually just stalling till the slides come up, right? You're good.
And we said that, you know, what we want to be really intentional about, and I'll just help Jay along with the stall, is that we want to ensure that we are keeping the conversation of special education. Oftentimes, unfortunately, and it's an age-old phenomena that we tend to talk about core academics and not count special education as a part of core academics, which it is. Especially if we are engaging in a model that is truly inclusive and allows students to access a variety of classroom experiences.
Yeah, thank you for saying that.
And special education frequently gets brought into conversation, even in folks bringing concerns to board meetings and or just via email, and consequently to present not only how and why and where special education functions in the district, but what our program looks like, what we've learned about our program, and where we'd like to go with it, so that you all are on board with knowing that. And so, as you know, so this is the part I won't go as much into, but special education is rooted in, it's actually 3 different federal laws that facilitate special education. The primary one, which everybody is aware of, is IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education. Then there's Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act. And then there's ADA Title II. And all 3 of those, PPS works to ensure that students identified as eligible for special education have access to a term, and I'll use this and try to make sure that you know each one of the acronyms I use, but a free and appropriate public education, which through definition is that they're able to access the educational services that PPS provides and benefit from. So, sure.
And so, IDEA deals with individuals with disabilities. 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act, those 2 focus on access. And so an individual may have a 504 plan, for example, so that they can access the learning environment, but they may not be a student with disabilities identified as special ed.
Sure. So there's a few things connected to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that are primary within this, and there's a lot of words on there, which is custom in special education. There's always lots of stuff, but basically to the maximum extent appropriate and to basic. Trying to think about least students must be educated first of all in the neighborhood schools and with non-disabled peers within the least restrictive environment, which is through legal definition. There's no specific requirement for this, but the general education classroom and or the most amount of service available to them to benefit from. So we provide special education services in schools. We provide special education services in PPS in hospitals. We provide them in residential programs. We provide them in day in residential programs. Our first and primary focus is to ensure the students have access to the general program, which is algebra class or English class or whatever it is. Can hit the next slide. Special education has a lot of acronyms in them. Alluded to, the first one's FATE. So that's regardless of the cost of the program, the district and the state provides it.
Yeah.
And then each student within special education has an individualized education plan, which I know you're aware of. That describes their program, not what the district offers and a continuum of services. So the IEP is the student's specialized. It defines how we go about educating that student, least restrictive environment. We talked about related services. Those are things that allow the student to access their specially designed instruction. So those are transportation, speech language services, occupational therapy, speech therapy. And then supplementary agent services are the accommodations and other supports that we provide for students access the general education program, and then specially designed instruction is kind of the heart of it all. It's the way in which we adapt instruction to ensure the students access it. And it's all outlined within that individual education plan. So next slide, please. There's lots of due process. I'll skip through this. I think you're aware of this. Students are referred for special education, then they're evaluated, and then a team creates an IEP. Next slide, please. And when a student is identified as eligible, there's 13 categories of disability in the state of Oregon under which they can potentially qualify for. Basically, being eligible means that not only do you have a disability, and this is where you separate it's from 504. You have a disability, you require specially designed instruction. That disability adversely impacts your educational performance. 504, you may have a disability, but you can benefit and make meaningful progress with accommodations. So that's the difference. It's the need for the additional instruction. Can you go on to the next slide? And then the individualized education plan is it includes a lot of information about a student, but outlines what their program is. So how much additional instruction they have, what the accommodations they require, how their progress is being monitored, individual goals for them related to how they're going to make progress in what they're being instructed. So they have reading instruction, they have goals, as you probably to, and then we track progress. Anyways, go ahead to the next slide. So in PPS, as Dr. Parker alluded to, we are focused on providing inclusive special education services. And we actually do a very good job of doing that. And I have some data I'll show you in a couple slides related to how effectively we manage and support that. As a department, we are focused on ensuring students have skills needed to independently function in college, career, and independent living when they leave us. So I just summarized all of those things really quickly for you right there. Belonging engagement are a big deal. Ensuring students are part of their community, part of their neighborhood school, part of their classrooms, and then ensuring, in addition to that, that we provide inclusive support of academic, social, emotional. So, next slide, please. So currently PPS serves about 7,600 students. So this is students that we serve both in district and out of district, in our CBOs and our charter schools, in what's something called the Columbia Regional Inclusive Services. And we have a few students that we serve that are placed out of state. So it's the entire number. It's always it's a number that moves depending upon enrollment from month to month. But that's the demographic breakdown and overall percentage of students that we are serving and supporting as of last week. So, and then,
I have a question.
yeah,
So I know when I first was on the board and we looked at the things had to say we could pay for. And one was like 2 nurses. No, full-time nurses to help. Certainly special ed people. And do we get our money? Do we get a lot of special ed money from somewhere else than the state?
no.
Or do we have to?
So our primary revenue is through the state of Oregon. It's a weighted formula, so every student eligible receives more than other students. So that's the primary resource. In addition to that, there's a high cost student fund, which if there's a percentage of students with a certain program that costs over, this isn't the number, I'm gonna throw it out. If their program costs over $100,000, then the district receives a little bit additional funding for them. Then the federal government provides IDEA resources both for the K-12 program and the preschool program. And the numbers.
But does a lot of it come out of our general fund?
So we spend all of the resources received to serve students with disabilities and then also encourage on the general fund. So, I don't have
But we do get help, but still.
You can find all that.
Sometimes think the public doesn't realize how much.
Correct. We expend 100% of our resources allocated to serve students with disabilities and then encroach on the general fund pretty significantly in order to fulfill our obligations. We provide we provided continuum of services. So this is something that comes up frequently in different places that we talk about special education. So this idea that there's a continuum of supports or continuum of services. So it's like a continuum level of instruction. So in Portland, we don't provide early childhood special education. We belong to a consortium that's run MECP, which is Multnomah Early Childhood Program thing. So we ensure that our students are served, but they do it in support within our schools, actually, in a lot of the preschool classrooms. And then we provide learning center type supports, which is every school has this, and it's focused on kids who primarily participate in general education most of the time. And then we have specialized classrooms focused on communication behaviors. It serves a lot of students on autism spectrum disorder, social emotional learning supports behavioral needs. Intensive skills are students with more significant needs. We have therapeutic school, and you probably heard of it as Pioneer School's therapeutic school. Then we have, and in the district, we support day and residential treatment programs. You often hear them referred to as DART. So PPS supports special education services delivered at those schools. And then we provide transition programming. So when students with disabilities who have continued need until age 21 graduate or fulfill their high school program, they can continue in the transition program. And we provide that to about 200 students in a couple locations across the district. Special education isn't a place, though. Special education is a service, and so I talk about classrooms, which is something that is a system, and I'll talk more about this next time, that we're going away from, because we want to ensure that students have social emotional learning instruction and mental health supports, not a place to go get their needs met. So we're in the middle of a transition right now, and so I mentioned these things, but it was a little bit contradictory to what I said. So when we come back in the future, I'll talk more about where we're going with that. Next slide, please. Overall, this is as of last week, as of Friday. Our ratios in K-8, so 1 teacher to 24 students as far as the caseload goes, and then 9-12 is 1 to 31. That fluctuates. Again, those are averages. So that means, of course, some folks have less than that, some folks have more than But the caseload number is a topic of conversation since I've been here, and so I wanted to share with you where we're at right now. And then in our specialized supports, you can see 1 to 11, 1 to 12, 1 to 10. At Pioneer, our student to teacher ratio, just teacher, there's other supports at Pioneer right now is 1 to 5. And then our community transition program is 1 to 21, and our CBO charter and all put together is about 1 to 24. So we are pretty robustly staffed with teacher to student case managers. So these are not, that doesn't mean that students with those teachers all day. It just means that this is their caseloads, and the IEP case managers do provide the special education services. But the students will be in and amongst, other classes in the school. Okay, so
just really quick. So I mean, this is basically just saying. Yeah, so like in a K through 8, each teacher would have 24 cases, right? And that's considered is there like a threshold for what's considered like a healthy?
So we staff our core program model for PPS for Learning Center is we staff it at 1 to 28. And so our average right now across K8 is 1 to 24. So we initially staffed for 1 to 28, but we're at 1 to 24 right now.
So
high school is 1 to 30, and we're a little over where we want to be right now on average. So we're going through and balancing some things out, which is what we do in September every single year.
the learning center means there's a center where sometimes those children are there, but often they're in another classroom and the teacher is responsible for seeing where all those 24 people are during the day.
Correct.
Okay.
Overall, next slide, please, Kurt. Overall, PPS does pretty well in relationship to ensuring students are participating in general education core classes. So over 80% of our students spend over 80% of their day in general ed, which is a major in special education. It's something that all districts are assessed on and then compared against. And this is pretty uncommon. You would find in most districts, it's not 80%, it's 60% or below 50 to 70. So we've done a very good job, and we continue to focus on that, but it's something we should be proud of in the sense of we achieve something other places haven't been able to achieve yet. And at the same time, we always try to ensure we're serving students in a way they can benefit.
Benefit them and other people in the classroom with them. Yeah.
So it's okay. I'm trying to figure out the graph real quick.
The big blue is the percentage of students 80% or more. The next group is 40 to 70, which is the dark grayish blue.
Yeah, I think the confusing part was like about 80% of the kids are in 80% or more.
Yeah.
Very good. I know. Nice coincidence there.
I hear you. It's special ed jargon. It really is. So next slide. So overarchingly, what we know, and this is like researched and settled. So in the law of education, or in education law, not actual law, but in educational research, we know the more time students with disabilities spend in the general education classroom, the higher performance they're going to have in reading and writing, math, the more they're going to attend school, the fewer disruptive behaviors are going to come, and the better outcomes after school. We know that. That's proven. It's not argument. We also know that this is the same, regardless of disability level, regardless of difficulty or disability severity, regardless of gender, and regardless of socioeconomic status. This is settled research. Next slide, please. We also know that there hasn't been a study conducted since the 1970s that has identified that students with intellectual and other developmental disabilities educated outside of the general education classroom do better in any way. They don't develop more skills. They don't have more successful connections to career and or independent living than they would as if they were in a general education classroom. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah.
Basically, in summary, pulling students out and segregating them into classrooms to have their needs met differently does not benefit them at all. We know that. And it's settled educational research.
Have you ever read the book Golem Girl?
I have not.
It's interesting. It's a woman who had spinal bifida. And so this was a physical disability. And she talks about, then she becomes an artist.
Yeah.
And she talks about how free she felt when she was in a school with other children with physical disabilities, because she wasn't alone.
Right.
And how they played together and all sorts of different disabilities, but all physical.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting to me.
Yeah.
She found it to be free,
No, I hear it.
not to be the only one.
I hear you. We in special education, the first half of my career, I spent a significant amount of time talking to families about how students' needs could best be met in a different place than the general education classroom. And through that very same time period, I learned that wasn't supported. And so I think that sometimes the programs are created because of what we think is right. And consequently, what I would ask about that, because I hear what that individual's saying, is what are the conditions within that climate that created it? It's so that I wasn't feeling connected or feel like I belonged. And so it's in some senses, there's also the component of celebration of disability and identifying that there's difference, and difference is okay. It's okay. And so, but I hear you, and I know, and I've seen that experience, and I've even contributed to it. And, over time I learned that wasn't the way that we needed to do it. And so we look at why are we creating that and try to address it. So over the course of the last couple of years, we've engaged in a couple of program reviews, and you'll start to hear about these more as we move forward. One of them was done by the Urban Special Education Collaborative. We had them come in. I'm going to share some results of what they shared with us, but we had them come in and meet with our staff, like visit our classrooms, visit our students, visit with our parents, and give us an understanding and an assessment as to how our program was functioning. Urban Special Education Collaborative it's a membership of like 150 urban school districts across the state, not the country. And PBS is a member. And so they came and did that. The other group that we had come in was it's called Public Consulting Group. They're another big player in special education across the country. And they specifically looked at our adapted PE program. So why did we do that?
You need to go a couple of slides.
Oh.
He got ahead of you.
I apologize. Sorry, Karen. There we go. Why did we do that? Because even though we have very positive data related to the amount of time students are spending in general education classrooms, we're not seeing the achievement outcomes that we want to see. And so we have to ask ourselves, okay, we're operating in a manner that we should be based on research. What is it that's happening that we need to do to better support our students? And so, and then in order also to become as aligned and ensure that students' disabilities are served in the same manner that all other students are through our high quality evidence-based research, instructional materials, structural framework, and our professional learning. So overall, next slide, please. And I'll go through this really quick. But it was ensuring that students with disabilities are provided the same access to curricular materials as every other student. Making sure that we are providing something called universal design for learning, and that's something we're picking up and moving forward this year as part of our instructional framework work. Universal design for learning is really complicated, but I'll simplify it. It's a way of planning for teachers to ensure that all students have a way to produce learning and knowing and understanding each individual student's way of doing that. And then providing and ensuring students and principals have professional development in what special education is and what it needs to be and look like within our schools. And then ensuring engagement opportunities for families The biggest lift is this concept, and I mentioned it to begin with, and I'll talk more about it moving forward, but this idea that students attend their neighborhood schools. And not go or be placed in a specialized program that's across town. It's work being done across the country, and it's work hugely emphasized in special education circles. And the Urban Collaborative identified specifically that we need to do that differently. And the reason is because the two things I emphasize hugely, which is the research that says it doesn't work. And so that's a component. And it's not that it doesn't work. People are working really hard for kids, really hard every single day. It's just that it doesn't result in outcomes that we thought it would. So we need to make a shift there. So, and then just ensuring all of our processes and guidelines and data are aligned. So we took these program reviews. They actually did not happen last school year. They happened the year before. And then we spent a year talking to stakeholders. So we talked to parents, we talked to kids, we talked to staff, we talked to principals, we talked to community members, all related to these program reviews, getting input and feedback from them on ultimately what we're going to do moving forward. So Kara, can excellent. I apologize. Yeah. So in overarching, just some themes, both staff, students, families, everybody's excited about this idea, what I'm talking about with neighborhood school model. Folks feel that all students would benefit from understanding the needs of children who experience disability and start to confront this ableism as a term. I don't know if you've heard that. The idea that we need to fix disability, basically, and start to tear that down, basically. Take that view, put that fence down.
They're all students.
And staff, same thing. Principals, same things. Want to make sure that everybody has a voice, and we're very intentional with what we're doing, and including kids and ensuring that they're part of the process. But overarchingly, what the program review said, what our staff said, what our students said, what our community says is all in the line, and we just need to, and we've started the process of moving forward with that. So next slide, please. And so what we want to be true is students with disabilities are included, and they're accessing high quality instructional practices. They're accessing grade level standards with other students, and our teachers are receiving professional learning that is as part of and included as every other teacher. And then in addition to that, additional resource support related to how to serve students. And that is what's going to impact our outcomes for our students with disability. Next slide. So I'll answer any questions. And as part of this, what I was hoping to be able to do was next time bring the "so what are we doing about it" part, which is another.
Okay, so I'll save those questions for next time.
Yes, we have a whole big plan.
Yes, I'm very excited to hear. Because this is, huge. Because I mean, one of my journeys as a teacher, right, was that, I have always taught in schools with high levels of high proportions of students with IEPs. And there was I remember a point in my practice where I was trying to figure out how to accommodate within my classroom all these IEPs and things like that. And what actually turned out was just my teaching became better. It was just better, best practices, right? Yes. This works for everybody. And so like, if there's a way to show more people how to do this or to progress it, especially I'm really interested in like what kind of trainings or professional development we're offering to teachers. But yeah, I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. So I'm very excited to hear all this.
Yeah, I second that. I can remember a child who was hearing impaired, and I should have thought of this before, but I just wrote the whole schedule on the board. Of course, everybody, all my visual learners did big little things, but I must say I always had support. I had an interpreter, and when I had a child with autism, which was very disruptive, I ended up getting somebody in there to be her aide. So I really hope we're also getting support for our teachers, because if you have support in the classroom, then it's actually easy. If you don't, it can be really, really hard.
So that's gonna be part of the next.
That's probably.
Yeah, I can, I didn't have that specific information, but I can include it, what our overall staff to student ratios look like. What we staff students who generate needs that are on the autism spectrum. What we could potentially do to support them across our system, as far as adults to students. There's other strategies that we want to make sure that we're implementing, because students that engage in that productive struggle and even experience a little bit of discomfort, even though they have disabilities, are far more likely to become independent or have some level of independence if they have to engage in that without adult support versus if we adult support and then make them dependent upon it. But I know that's not exactly what you're asking, but I can give all that information to you.
That'd be great.
One question about the previous slide. It's slide number 8. I'll show that. So slide number 8, it shows the percentage of total students with IEP, and then it breaks it down by
Demographics.
demographics. Here's a scientist coming out. There's a percentage of the total. But if we want to look at for disparities in if there's any disparities in the demographics, it would be percentage of that group, right? So like what percent of the Asian group is IEP? And I guess, do we have data on that?
We can get that.
Okay.
I mean, we have it. I can present it for you. Yes.
So one thing I would, if there is a disparity, I would be concerned about, like access to IEP, for example, like is just making sure that's not an issue, right? Or if it is an issue, we're addressing it.
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Okay. Right, like for example, if there's a lower percentage of disadvantage, because the scientific, assumption is like every demographic is the same percentage of people neurodiverse or whatever needs accommodations. And if there's some groups are a lower percentage than others, it may be an access problem, right? Language barrier, other issues and stuff like that. So I just want to make sure that we're covering bases.
Okay.
It's very exciting here. I'm really excited to hear what's coming up next.
Yeah.
Which, because a lot of that stuff also goes into, like grading.
Yeah.
Grade segment into the next part, right?
Say what right in.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at even continuing our conversations about graduation requirements that we're including in special education, as a part of the comprehensive conversation. And we could continue the conversation in special education again to share next time the plan.
Mm-hmm.
We share with you what we found, what we're working towards, and how we're going to move forward. We could definitely present next time. As we transition.
Another question. I mean, you were there too, Friday night or Thursday night for the graduation of the summer school graduates. And I'm just curious, I wonder what percentage of those people had been through in special ed. And it was such a heartwarming thing to see people who obviously had to struggle to make it. And how much a special ed helps them through. I mean, obviously I didn't know, but I imagine there were quite a few.
Just absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely look at that. But, as you could see, there is a benefit from ensuring that we have the programming necessary to meet multiple needs that our students have, and to offer the programming that will not just meet them at the need, but also stretch and excel them so that they can achieve at the best and highest levels So as we, transition, we could move forward in our conversation. We're gonna next have a conversation about assessments and equitable grading practices. I think because grades is only one form of an assessment, a way of assessing. I think we could talk about assessment as a larger umbrella first. And then, so we're going to bring up the slides for the presentation that Dr. Bernard Adams is going to take us through.
There we go. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Proctor and Chair Wong. I wanted to just share a little bit about our approach to creating a balanced assessment system. And so, welcome any questions you might have. I want to start with this idea of alignment. To really get at student achievement, three things need to be in tight alignment. And that's the written curriculum, the taught curriculum, and the assessed curriculum. And of course, my team only deals with one part, that assessed curriculum, but thankfully, I think it's a benefit that I'm also an educator. So I've been in the teaching trenches and understand those other two areas as well. But what we want to understand and ensure is that our assessments are giving us clear and accurate pictures of student learning. Kara, if I could have the next slide. Assessment is connected deeply to our instructional framework. Our instructional framework has four pillars, as I would call them. And the fourth pillar is data-driven, and seen there by our graphic, and then a picture from a page in the framework. And it's really about the idea that we use both quantitative and qualitative sources, multiple sources, to collect, and we collect those sources and we analyze them and we disaggregate them by race in order to improve teaching and learning outcomes, both in the classroom, in the school, across an area, and throughout the entire district. Kara, if I could have the next slide. We have some guiding principles that sort of bucket our work in the assessment office. First, we think there must be a clear purpose for the assessment. So we want people to understand why they're providing an assessment. And the ultimate is when students can tell you why they're taking an assessment. Is really the ultimate goal there. We want the value of that assessment to exceed the instructional time that you lose, because especially when you're giving a standardized assessment, you're taking time away from instruction. And we have, I would argue, the smallest standardized instructional blueprint in Oregon. We have a really tiny blueprint around that. So we're not wasting valuable time or taking valuable time away from teachers. We don't want the mechanics to impact the value. Sometimes I've lived in a previous life instances where we were implementing a new assessment and it just took a while to get it to work technically, and that really turned people off because it was a burden to make it happen, and then it didn't matter how useful or not the results were because it had impacted the mechanics, that impacted the value. And finally, we want our assessments to be fair and support our equity work. They need to show us where we're doing well with students and groups of students, and show us where we're not doing as well, so we know where we need to focus more intensely and targeted towards student outcomes and continuous improvement. Kara, if I could have the next slide. All right, so this is a graphic representation of our assessment system. One, we know, starting at the top, that assessments live on this continuum from more qualitative, where you get rich information, to more quantitative, where you get scores, numbers, and percentiles. We also know, going to the bottom of the graphic, that there's a continuum from formative assessment. So is the assessment in time to allow the teacher to adjust his or their instruction, or is it more summative? And so it tells us this is what happened, but there really isn't chance to go back and do anything about it right now, right? It's already happened and the kids have moved, the students have moved on. And so we also create this graphic where the width of the rectangle is proportionately the amount of time we would hope that teachers in the school would spend in each assessment area. So I'll start with the green. That's daily planning and instruction, the formative assessment process that our teachers use. These are student assignments and work products. They also include our screeners and our diagnostics. In addition to that, we have our curriculum embedded assessments in yellow. We've made good on the voters voting in the bond around our curricular resources, and we are adopting those curricular resources. And we expect that our teachers will use those curriculum embedded assessments because those are closest to instruction to inform and make adjustments. And then as we get to the red and the blue, or that might look a little purple, navy boxes, we have the pre-ACT, our MAP assessments, and I have them separated from SAT and OSAS only because they happen in the first semester, right? So technically you get pre-ACT results and you could attempt to intervene during the second semester of the school year. But by the time students had taken SAT and OSAS, by the time we get those results, those students have moved on to the next grade. And so that's why those are furthest to the right. And then this year we are, if you can go to the next slide, Kara. We are working with our school-based instructional coaches who in turn will work with their teacher teams and their principal to really unpack and make living this idea of student learning analysis, which really will happen with the information between the green and the yellow rectangles in our system and model. My particular belief is that if we focus on the formative assessment process and use formative assessments and curriculum embedded assessments to make adjustments for student learning and growth, the state tests, MAP, everything else will take care of itself because we really use the most rich information that's closest to the student and closest to the teacher. The last slide is just where do you find more information if you want to go and double and triple click. We have assessment calendars that outline the assessments that are required. Those include our statewide and district adopted standardized assessments. And those are only OSAS, well, statewide is OSAS. District adopted, we have MAP in grades 3 through 8 and the SAT in grade 11. And then what our curriculum embedded assessments are that we want teachers to use in order to drive their instruction. We also, in addition, and the full board will hear about this as a part of our update on Division 22 requirements, we're also required to identify local performance assessments in the curriculum by which students will demonstrate their mathematics skills, their reading skills, their speaking and their writing skills. And what we've been able to do this year that we weren't able to fully do in years past because we didn't have adopted materials in all areas was identify curriculum embedded assessments that could also fulfill the requirement of the local performance assessment. So it's not a second assessment that I have to give at the end of Unit 3. It's that I just give the curriculum embedded assessment and it also meets the requirement of the local performance assessment as established by ODE. So wherever we can, I was a special educator and a teacher, and I understand the paperwork burden, like our special educators do as well. Whenever we can, we want to make sure we're really not expanding teacher workload, shrinking it where we can, or at least in this instance, keeping it the same.
Okay.
And that is the last slide. I think the next slide is just questions, if you had any of me.
We have a lot. I feel like a lot of it's going to be addressed in future and presentations. Yeah, and we're talking about assessments. We're talking more just like, I guess, the other conversation we're getting into is equitable grading and that stuff, right? And this assessment is more just like the MAP test. Also, I assume in the core classes in terms of like keeping up to efficiencies, right?
I'm thinking like term papers, biology labs, when we're in that green box, written responses to mathematic problems, and things like that, writing samples. So when I think of assessment, I think of the Latin root word, which means to sit beside. And so I'm assessing Joanna, I'm sitting beside and working with her or watching her work in order to understand where she is performing. So mostly what we want to think about is that richness that happens inside of the classroom that isn't necessarily a standardized assessment.
So a presentation you've made to the class
Mhm.
or a diorama you made to explain it.
Yes, ma'am.
That kind of-
Mhm.
Those are the day-to-day grades. You know, they are assessed in a way that they produce a grade sometimes. But other measures that teachers can use. And so the distinction on that spectrum between in the green, what is formative assessments versus what is summative assessment. Our map, our OFACs tend to fall into the summative. The formative assessment is what teachers can use out of the day-to-day instruction to inform. That's how I think of formative assessment.
Mhm.
To inform my planning, my future instruction, where I need to reteach, where I need to pull Patty and Eddie to the side to ensure that they truly understand. Yeah. And those, that side by side, that regular interval of understanding how the learning within a child is progressing is part of what we call assessments.
In my previous district, I was in charge of grading and reporting. And what we would always talk about is grades should be based on a body of evidence. That evidence is the evidence of the various assessments that the teacher has used throughout their term or the unit or the quarter or the semester to determine if students have mastered the content and met the standard.
I know one thing we did were put together portfolios.
Mhm.
So when you had finished a particular area, you're gonna put your best work in that.
Yes.
I mean, this was the second grade, so it's a little bit.
But it works for
And then in the end, we would present it to
Yes.
parents. There are no grades, but it seems like that could extend
So,
to almost any class,
yeah,
any grade.
is it okay to go back to
Sure.
that bar?
Both
slide?
slides are not in our,
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
It's in board
It's
book.
there.
It's in there now.
It's in there now.
Oh,
Okay.
yes, it's there now.
Right. Yeah,
Sorry.
okay, sir.
Which how far
Yeah,
do
that
you want to
one.
go back, Director?
Yeah, that's the one that I was.
Yeah, this one. So like. I feel like there's a separation between grade. I mean, with assessments, it's necessary to define the purpose, right? I mean, I feel like the ideal assessment is something, it's a tool that students can use to increase engagement as well as like track their own growth, right? I mean, that's the ideal assessment. And that would be the purpose of like, hopefully the purpose of like the thing you outlined in blue. But I like what you said about like defining purpose as well, because I feel like isn't like map testing is a different purpose, right?
Mhm.
It's for the district to figure out where are our holes, right?
Yes.
And so I think maybe that part in terms of communication, I can't talk anymore. Communicating like the purpose, I think there's some confusion about that part is with the sense I'm getting from like community and things like that.
Yes, you're right.
So,
Sure, no, we can never do enough communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my experience, we cannot over communicate. And I know that there have been questions around map assessment and what the purpose of it. And to your point, I always say we're trying to make sure students are growing for every year they're with us, and where we had, to your point, gaps that we need to really address, right? It isn't to inform student grades or teachers' instruction. It's really for us to understand what is a common measure we had at third grade, at seventh grade in math, in English language arts, where we can see across the district how things appear to be going, and where there appears to be a concern, we can move in and do further investigation to understand what the concern really is and might be.
Thank you. And then the last question I have is, this might be going into the next part, but I'm just curious about, is there like in terms of trying to improve our assessment practices, is there already professional development and stuff embedded already? Coaches are working with teachers or principals in terms of just improving our best practices in terms of assessment?
Coaches will be working with teachers and with the coaches with their principals, who will be providing professional learning support to their teachers around the entire unit planning cycle, from understanding your unit, backwards mapping it, unpacking it, to assessing student learning in the unit. So we'll be doing a cycle of those learnings throughout the school year with teachers in terms of professional learning.
In all subject areas or particularly the new reading?
That's a great question. So it goes across all subject areas, the protocols that are being developed, and I'm only in your lane, Dr. Armstrong, sorry.
No, you're doing
The
great.
protocols that are being developed are subject and content agnostic. Right, so it doesn't,
Right.
Oh, I see.
the idea will be that there are certain steps you go when you unpack your unit. The materials I have might be a little bit different than Philippe's materials, but there's still steps that both Philippe and I take, even though I might be teaching third grade ELA and he's teaching high school algebra. There's still steps that we need to take that are very similar.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Very thankful for sharing this work.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Adams. And so as we,
I do have to run. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Okay.
so
thank
as
you
we
for running us good.
continue the conversation, thank you. We can go back to what's in the green, right?
Yeah.
Which is, how is it that we are looking at daily instruction and daily assessments? And then those daily assessments, what do they produce? And oftentimes they produce grades. But we are in the process of exploration of how we can ensure that grading practices are more balanced in our system. And I'll introduce it by saying that, we want to ensure that if there is a grading practice at one school, that the grading practice is consistent so that a student doesn't have a different experience based on what school they attend. Likewise, within the school, that if a student is taking an English class, English 1, with Ms. Calvert, and then another student is taking English 1, with Ms. Proctor, that their grading outcomes would be different based on a different practice in each classroom. So the team is going to now present to you what we call equitable grading. And the slide is available in Board Book. And we want to introduce what we are currently exploring. So there is no policy change. There is no district-wide practice in this endeavor. It is a conversation that we're having with a number of educators and schools who are engaging in an exploration with us. So I will turn it over to.
I'll start.
Almost there.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Proctor.
And Philippe, just while we're waiting, could you please help me with your last?
Sure.
Word? I didn't want to use you in my example. and I got
This
a
will
little-
give you another chance to practice the
Yes.
role. Christich. Christich.
Re-stitch.
Excellent.
Re-stitch.
The last part is just stitch. So Christich.
Re-stitch.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that's a perfect way to segue into this conversation. And I'll just kick us off by saying that as we continue to learn about equitable grading practices, as we continue to explore, the key question that we can go to the next slide is how might this practice help us further our commitment to achieving educational equity, specifically in terms of raising the achievement of all our students and reducing the racial achievement and opportunity gap. With everything that we do, we want to make sure that we're moving closer towards reaching our educational why, which is the educational equity in our school district. So next slide. So this afternoon, we'll talk a little bit about what are the shifts in grading that equitable grading practices are calling for. How might this align? How is this already aligning with some of our existing initiatives? What is currently happening in our school buildings? What are our plans moving forward? And we want to make sure that we have time for any questions. Next slide.
All right, thank you. So we'd like to share a little bit more about those key shifts to equitable grading, and this can be found in more detail in that link there to equitable grading practices on the continuum. And so just to share a little bit about each of these, I think that opening by Dr. Proctor, it just really hits the piece here on mathematically sound scales. So 2 teachers teaching students, let's think of 2 students in 2 different classrooms, right? Let's say they have the same mastery, and yet potentially without these practices, they may be receiving different grades. And so the shift really is arriving at those sound, durable practices where students would experience similar outcomes in their grading. The performance standards really are intending to show a student's progress toward a standard within the grade book. Rubrics really are intended to unveil what we're asking students to do. What is it that we're wanting them to learn? How will a student know when they're successful, right? And then mitigating those non-academic factors. Oftentimes in a traditional grade book, we may see things like participation. We may see behavior. We may see attendance. So when we make that shift to equitable grading, there really is not room for that when we're really reporting out specifically on the progress towards sound, toward standards, right? When we eliminate those bias-resistant practices, these can be things like extra credit. The example that's often used in training is the teacher giving extra credit for Philippe bringing tissue boxes into the classroom. Well, what if I couldn't afford tissue boxes to bring into my classroom? Then I wouldn't get that extra mark in the grade book, right? So that's an example. And then providing multiple opportunities to demonstrate proficiency. Sometimes this is one that is a little bit hard for teachers at first when they see this, because they first think, oh, I need to provide multiple assessments, or I need to test students multiple times. And over time, as we've learned more about this, it's actually just providing the same, say, test question multiple times, where if a student doesn't get it the first time, but they, let's say on a quiz, but then later on in the chapter assessment, they nail it, their grade can reflect mastery, right? Opposed to that first time around on an assessment. And then normalizing feedback to include multiple opportunities for student self-assessment. This is really talking about the culture of the classroom, right? The culture of the classroom is one where maybe even us as peers, Philippe and I are giving each other feedback, right? Well, then when the teacher goes to give feedback, this is a comfortable norm that we are grading in a way that's giving feedback and progress again toward those standards. Use of a standards-based or competency-based grading model, ultimately to arrive at this fully 100%, the grade book would also be reflective of these standards. So when you look at a standards-based grade book compared to a traditional grade book may have certain scales for certain things. Quizzes may have a certain scale, homework may have a certain scale, so on and so forth. Whereas that standards-based report card is going to have a 4-point scale specific to each standard. That's the big shift there. And then really calculating grades ultimately for that final grade for the class is completely reflective of a student's proficiency. And so those are really the key shifts to equitable grading. This next slide shows a quick comparison of a traditional grading system compared to that standards-based grading system. So just highlight some of those comparisons, again, where maybe it was based on a percentage system, something like that, opposed to really aligned to those performance standards in the grade book. That's a quick overview of the shifts when we move to an equity-based grading system.
So equitable grading practices are called out as one of the initiatives in the middle school redesign, as well as the high school success plan, and are also included in our instructional framework, in our ongoing commitment to make sure that educators are providing meaningful feedback to students, and that in much the same way that we want to ensure that our curriculum is standards aligned, that our instruction is standards aligned, we also want to make sure that our assessment is standards aligned and free of much of the bias that Joanne talked about. So this is not a tangential initiative. It is very much embedded in some of the core work that our middle schools and high schools are engaging in. Next slide. We can skip to the next two slides. You can see where equitable grading practices are called out. So the question is, where are we today? And I think Margaret will talk about that one.
So grading practices have been a conversation for just about forever, I would say, right? And so part of what we're seeing is this is an ongoing body of work and discussion. It's gone through various forms. You hear standards-based grading, you hear proficiency-based grading, you hear there's a lot of work done by Diane Smith around proficiency-based grading over a number of years. And ultimately, all of it is about how do we communicate with students about their progress and families, right? Like that's ultimately grading is all about communication. So part of what we've done recently and coming out of the pandemic, when we went to online learning, there's a real challenge to saying, well, how do we get to know what students know in this new environment, right? And so I think that in the last few years, this is we've seen equitable grading sort of surface in a number of ways. It really came from conversations with educators and with their administrators, and how do we do this in this particular context and provide really good information back to students about their progress. And then we also started to look at there are some areas that we've seen this some of these shifts happen. So if we look in the sort of in 21-22, we had some content areas that were really looking, specific content areas that we're looking at how do you shift some of the grading practices. So our science teams really had a long conversation about what does that look like? How do you surface an opportunity for students to demonstrate understanding in science classrooms? How is that tied to what standards are learning? How do you know which spaces and places students are showing proficiencies and have strengths, and what are areas that we can focus in on to support them in their learning? I think the other piece that happened in the 21-22 school year, our secondary administrators and many of our administrators went through some collaborative work during our leadership sessions to really think about how this is showing up consistently, not only across our system, but within school sites. So we're seeing this kind of happen in both levels, some from the ground level, really in classrooms and at buildings, and then also across the district in our central office. You see a lot of individual school sites engaged in book studies or professional learning, that this really became a robust conversation, spurred in much coming out of the pandemic in particular. In the last school year, we also have had educator professional learning during cadres and on professional learning days that looked at the tenets of what it means to really have a robust and internally consistent grading practices. And then there are a number of schools and principals said, okay, let's see how we can foster this and bring it forward. So if we go to the next slide, please. So there are a couple of places that we're seeing some really promising practices. In the spring of last year, about 39% of middle school principals reported to having one type or more the tenets or principles of equitable grading in operation in their schools. Mount Tabor, Hosford, and Kellogg, for example, are doing some things school-wide, while Astor, Fobby, and Sunnyside and Vernon are partially implementing. And I went back and had a conversation with Principal Longo from Mount Tabor and said, so what does that look like to do something school-wide, and what were the specific parts of equitable grading that you're focusing on? So they were focusing on a 4-point scale, that would be consistent in all classrooms. They are also looking at opportunities for students to demonstrate learning multiple times, for example. So that if there is an opportunity to take an assessment or to write a paper, that there are opportunities for revision and improvement. So those are a couple of the examples that she gave. And then we also see that at certain schools and the high schools in particular, we see it in specific teams of teachers that are working on it and really thinking about what are the practices. And similarly, we're seeing connection to specific standards, that you're seeing some type of a rubric that is associated with it, a scale that is not 100 points. Some schools are using 7-point scales, others are using 4. But then this idea that students should have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their understanding, that it's not just sort of one and done. So those are some pieces, and as Dr. Proctor said up front, we're exploring some of these. We're looking at promising practices, and then how do we formalize this into some guidelines that we can use across the district to reduce the variability that students are experiencing, not only within school sites, but across school sites.
I also do want to add that for equitable grading practices, there's a student component that we have to always consider, especially when we're dealing with our second language learners and our special ed students. So if you're using a rubric, for example, you've got to look at the content for each of the descriptors in that rubric to see what will equate the level of performance for a student who is not in those programs. So if you're requesting that students write a 5-paragraph essay, maybe for the special ed student or for a DSL student, it might be shorter as long as it has all the components that you require it to have, because they are still in the phase of language development, right? Or you also have to consider what skills the student has brought into the classroom, because based on the skills that the student brings into the classroom, then you can say, this is what mastery looks like. And if this is what mastery looks like, and these are the skills the child has, what can we consider to equate equity leading up to mastery for this particular student? Because not all the students are going to thrive based on the rubrics that you create, and those rubrics have to be adaptable to the needs of the kids, especially when they come in with specialized areas of concern or areas that we need to address.
That gets a lot into the debate with grades based on proficiencies versus based on growth.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Right.
It's one of the conundrums that,
Yeah, so how would you say that then? Because it's a different proficiency. So good proficiency for someone coming in with that beginning. But you eventually want to help that person go even further. So how exactly?
That's why the descriptors that go into the different aspects of the grade scale matter a lot, because then you're actually looking at content mastery as opposed to just the little box, right? And then based on the content mastery that you're striving for, you're also looking at the skill sets that the child already has to measure them towards that content mastery. So I may require, years ago when we're in the classroom, they tell you to write a paragraph with 5 sentences, right? Well, maybe what you want to do is have the student write a paragraph that's maybe a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, depending on their skill set, or they might even speak it into a recorder. And then what you look at is you look at the content. Do they link the sentences? Are the sentences sophisticated? Do they use all simple sentences? So there are so many ways to look at the ability of that student relative to equitable grading practices. And I'll be looking at that in terms of what the student is able to do versus what the rest of the class is able to do using the rubrics, right? As long as I can get the same content and the same quality from them, even if it's a shorter piece.
Yeah, I understand that, but you also eventually want to help that child reach.
Yes,
The
not
full
mastery.
mastery. Yeah.
Yes.
So as we continue, we have a couple more slides.
I can just offer perhaps in a traditional classroom, in a traditional system, when students are assessed, that grade sticks with them for the rest of the semester, and the growth that they experience following that assessment is not taken into account. In this system, we privilege and center growth over when students demonstrate that growth. We document where they are in their progression we assess, but we celebrate their achievement, their ultimate achievement. And so that's a real benefit of a system like this. So I think Margaret will always be Margaret for me. So the hope is to move away from a space where there are multiple scales, multiple reporting mechanisms, multiple factors taken into account when assessing students, and really move into a standardized, equitable system of assessing that is more accurate, unbiased, and ultimately motivating for students, where students understand that I know what is the target that I'm trying to achieve. I know that I'll have time and support to get there. And so students take more ownership of their educational experience. They don't feel like their grades, they can be in charge of their learning, right? They're partners in the process rather than being subjects who are graded by grown-ups. And so maybe just a little bit in the closing minutes about our plans moving forward. Next slide.
We're at 6:01.
Yeah.
Which
yeah,
is
move
our
on.
time, so, and we do have public.
Yeah, because I have like a million questions, but I'll save it for next time.
Yeah. Assessment can go on further.
Assessment, instruction and learning is the heart of what we do. So it'll be good opportunities.
Sure, we just have one
Next slide.
final slide that we can, would you like us to do that real quick? Just shows our short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, and this sits within our redesign project for middle grades 6 through 8 throughout the district, and also within the high school success plan. That's what we're aiming to do, really build upon the successes that we're having right now.
And we'll be happy to send that.
Okay, please, yes.
Continue the conversation.
Great conversation.
Great, I think for the sake of time, I have a few questions, but I'll save it for next time. I think we have public comments, right? And so,
What we would do is, I think, sounds like we would move our conversation on graduation requirements to next time.
oh, yeah,
We're
thank
gonna
you,
continue
sorry.
That conversation.
I totally didn't forget
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
And we were gonna do some ideations and some brainstorming together as a group, and I think maybe we could start with that next time.
Yeah, is that, and that, if that's okay with
If that's
everyone?
okay with them. It's just a recommendation.
Yeah, let's, I like that recommendation and I am going to follow that too. Yeah, next time, let's start with, I'm gonna write it down so I don't forget. Start with graduation requirements. Great, so, for public comments, if it's okay, I was told that there's a script for this, but I don't, so I'm just gonna riff. Public comments, you're welcome to, sit over there where it says public comment if you like. I think the time limit is 3 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, and then there's a warning or something.
My phone has an alarm.
Great.
And thank you so much for your patience as we.
Yeah, thank you.
I was very glad to be here.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Glad you enjoyed the
Very
presentations of the class.
engaged. My name is Sylvia Hart Landsberg, as I said, and I'm with the War Resisters League. And I'll cut to the chase, but then back up a little bit about what we're about. One of our practical reasons for being here is we want to follow and be involved in any discussions the district has at any level where we can do that about junior ROTC. The ROTC possibilities, and I heard really clearly that it's just an investigation at this point. You said totally. So we're not jumping into any conclusions either. I would like to know about dates and times and locations of meetings, and thank you for the information. And who is on the committee, so I will just give you my email as a start. Would I give that to you, Karen? Okay, that's right. The War Resisters League is interested in helping the students understand the military recruiters information in a wider context. We're, of course, obviously emphasizing peace and peace education. And we try to help the students understand some of the military's messages with regard to their classroom lessons in literacy, history, global politics, and the environment, and to make choices realizing that message the military gives so strongly is just a fraction of what they need to be looking at with every career decision. And some of our activities, not all, are a program we call Recruiter Watch, in which we go into the high schools when recruiters come in and offer this kind of information. So I'm satisfied, but how shall I proceed? What should I do next so that we stay linked in and the people that we work with stay linked in?
Go for it.
Yeah. I think if you share your contact with Kara Bradshaw, and we will be sure to try to loop you in.
Okay.
As we continue to ask questions ourselves.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Crystal Souls.
Sure. I work with Sylvia along this Recruiter Watch. And I have been in the service, and I don't find the recruiters to be that tolerated to telling the truth. I mean, if somebody goes in there to sign a contract to be with the military, they almost need a lawyer because the loopholes are huge. And so it's a little bit deceptive. The idea of having a junior ROTC in school kind of gives the impression that the school district approves of war. I don't like that. And I disapprove of the, I mean, it's a kind of a setup. They kind of have advertising that appeals to kind of young male machismo there. They used to have chin-up bars and push-up contests in the schools to try and attract the male students. And we thought that there wasn't very much information kind of portrayed in this kind of routine. It was kind of a trickery, getting them to sign up for the military. And in my view, the military is an armed enforcer of foreign policy. And I don't see any advertiser or any recruiter talking about foreign policy. I'm not sure they know about it, but they are taught in schools to follow instructions, follow the leader. I don't think it's healthy for the students, and my goal is to kind of keep students from kind of experiencing any kind of PTSD. So that's my purpose in opposing junior ROTC. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for taking your time to come to the meeting. All right. We have one.
Virtually, we have Ron Bruce.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Karanja Cruz, CREWS for the record. I am a current CBRC member. I'm also on the site council for both of my children's school. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm also a member of the FACE, which is the Family Advisory Council on Education, which is derived from the great work of Dr. Armstrong. Shout out to Dr. Armstrong. I'm also a vendor of PPS, where I provide professional development service for educators through the Teaching with Purpose Conference, which is coming up October 13th. Hoped to soon be working with Dr. Proctor in a more comprehensive direction, where we provide professional development for our educators. I have a few questions as an educator and a parent. One of my major concerns I've been addressing for a few years now is that when my kids were in elementary school, they were receiving exceedings for their grades in the current grading report card that we have for the district for elementary. when they arrived to middle school, they were receiving A's, but still they were not passing the state standardized tests. So even in elementary school and also in middle school, now we're starting high school. So I'm just curious about the alignment of the current grading system that we have. Is it aligned with the standardized assessment that our kids are taking? And I'm just trying to figure out the alignment piece. So I have a lot of questions. I plan on to be very engaged with this committee, being involved and sharing testimonies, things in that nature. And so I have a lot of questions, and then I see that I have 20 seconds left. I also noticed something in the special education presentation that it was 11% of Black students in special education, but however, there's only 8% of students, Black students in the Portland Public School District. So that's a pretty high number. As also have a question about the assessment calendar. Dr. Adams had mentioned that there are going to be local performance tasks embedded in the curriculum. I was curious, I went to the calendar, I didn't see any local performance tasks being scheduled. So I'm just curious of when that's going to be taking place within the embedded curriculum assessments. And so I just plan on being engaged in this committee, have a lot of questions. I'll just hopefully just work with the board and maybe some staff members to get the questions answered. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so that concludes public comment. Great. Any else, everyone good? Guess we can adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great hearing all this.
We need a gavel.
I know, I was about to say, I need to get you a gavel.
Oh, yeah.
Just, here it goes. Thank you.